of rain and rotting vegetables. A sharp, sour tang that clung to the back of my throat as I pressed myself deeper into the shadowed alcove between the bakery and the butcher's shop. The cobblestones were still warm from the day's sun, a small mercy against the chill creeping through my thin dress. I'd chosen this spot carefully, close enough to the market square that the morning vendors would wake me before trouble found me, far enough from the tavern district that drunken men wouldn't stumble over my sleeping form. I wasn't supposed to be here. 3 weeks ago, I'd had a bed. Narrow and lumpy, but mine. I'd had work, steady hands that scrubbed floors in the Alpha King's estate until they shone like mirrors. I'd had a routine, a place, however small, in the grand machinery of the royal household. Now I had cobblestones and the charity of a baker who sometimes left yesterday's bread in the alley. My fingers traced the rough stone wall behind me, grounding myself in something solid. The market square was emptying as the last merchants packed their wares, their voices carrying across the cooling air, haggling over unsold fish, complaints about taxes, speculation about the king's upcoming selection ceremony. That last topic made my stomach clench. The selection. Every unmated female between 18 and 25 was required to attend, to stand in the great hall while the Alpha King walked among us, searching for his queen. It was supposed to be an honor. For most, it was. For me, it had been the beginning of the end. I hadn't been chosen, of course. Why would I be? Pale blonde hair that never quite obeyed, gray eyes too large for my face, a body too thin from years of not quite enough. I was forgettable, invisible, exactly what a servant should be, but I'd made the mistake of catching his eye, just once, as he passed through the rows of hopeful women. The Alpha King's gaze had landed on me for perhaps 3 heartbeats before moving on, but those 3 heartbeats had been enough. Lady Cordelia, the king's cousin and head of the household staff, had noticed. She'd always looked at me with something close to disdain, but after the selection, that disdain had curdled into active malice. Within a week, I'd been accused of stealing, a silver hairpin found conveniently in my quarters, one I'd never seen before that day. I'd tried to explain, to defend myself, but who listens to a maid when a lady speaks? The head steward had been almost apologetic as he'd dismissed me. "We can't have thieves in the king's house," he'd said, not meeting my eyes. "You understand." I'd understood perfectly. I'd also understood that without a reference, without proof of honest service, no other household would hire me. No inn would rent me a room. No respectable establishment would acknowledge my existence. So I'd ended up here, in the spaces between, learning to make myself small and silent and unnoticed, skills I'd thought I'd already mastered, but survival demanded perfection. A sound made me stiffen, footsteps, measured and deliberate, too purposeful for a merchant heading home. I drew my knees closer to my chest, making myself smaller in the shadows. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by others, lighter and quicker. Guards, perhaps, on their evening patrol. "The entire northern district, Your Majesty." "Then we'll return to the estate." My blood turned to ice. "Your Majesty." I didn't breathe, didn't move. The Alpha King himself, walking through the market district at night. It was unheard of. Kings didn't wander the streets like common men. They certainly didn't pass through garbage-strewn alleys where discarded servants slept. "I want to see it," a voice responded, deep and rough, with an edge that suggested the speaker rarely had to repeat himself. "Not the version my advisors show me. The real city." "Your Majesty, it's not safe. I'm the Alpha King, Garrett. If I'm not safe in my own capital, then we have larger problems than you're admitting." The footsteps were so close now. Any moment they would pass my alcove. And if they had lanterns, if the light fell at the wrong angle. I held perfectly still, a trick I'd learned as a child when my mother's gentleman callers came through our cramped apartment. Stillness was safety. Invisibility was armor. The group passed. 4, maybe 5 figures, their shadows stretching long across the cobblestones. I caught a glimpse of dark clothing, the glint of weapons at their sides, and then, just as I thought they'd moved on, one of them stopped. "Sir?" The lighter voice. Garrett, presumably. "Is something wrong?" Silence. Terrible, weighted silence. Then, "There's someone here." My heart hammered so hard I was certain they could hear it. I pressed myself flatter against the wall, as if I could somehow melt into the stone itself. "Where?" Garrett's voice sharpened. "Show yourself. By order of the king." I didn't move. Couldn't move. Every instinct screamed at me to stay hidden, to wait until they gave up and moved on. But footsteps approached my alcove, purposeful now, and then lantern light flooded my hiding place. I squeezed my eyes shut, childishly, stupidly, as if not seeing them would somehow make me invisible. "It's a girl," someone muttered. "Just some homeless girl. She's sleeping rough," Garrett said, and there was something like pity in his tone. "Should we move her to the shelter house?" "No." That deep voice again, closer now. So close I could smell cedar and night air. Something wild and indefinable underneath. "I know her." My eyes flew open. The Alpha King stood at the mouth of my alcove, lantern raised, and his expression was nothing like what I'd expected. Not disgust or anger or even the vague dismissal I'd grown accustomed to. His dark eyes were wide, almost shocked, his strong features caught between confusion and something that might have been recognition. He was younger than I'd thought during the selection, perhaps only 5 or 6 years older than my own 23. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and there was a hardness to him, a contained violence that seemed barely restrained. But beneath that, in the way he stared at me now, there was something raw, something almost hurt. "You," he said slowly, as if testing the word. "You worked in my household." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway, unable to find my voice. "What are you doing here?" Each word was measured, careful. "Why are you sleeping in an alley?" Shame burned through me, hot and acidic. Of all the people to discover me like this, powerless, homeless, reduced to nothing, of course it would be him, the man whose fleeting attention had cost me everything. My voice came out as a whisper, rough from disuse. "I was dismissed, Your Majesty, dismissed." He repeated it flatly. "For what reason?" I hesitated. Lady Cordelia was his cousin. Who would he believe? Her, or a former maid found sleeping in filth? "Theft," I finally said, because the truth would come out anyway. I was accused of stealing a hairpin. Something flickered across his face, too quick to read. "And did you?" "No." The word came out stronger than I'd intended. "I would never—" "Your Majesty," Garrett interrupted gently. "We should continue the patrol. I'm sure the girl will find her way to the shelter." "Be quiet, Garrett." The king's eyes never left mine. "When were you dismissed?" 3 weeks ago, Your Majesty. 3 weeks. His jaw tightened. "You've been living on the streets for 3 weeks, and no one thought to inform me that one of my household staff had been cast out without proper investigation." I blinked, confused. Why would he care? Why would the Alpha King concern himself with one insignificant maid? He turned sharply to Garrett. "Find out who authorized her dismissal. I want a full report on my desk by morning, including the evidence used to accuse her and the names of everyone involved in the decision." "Your Majesty, surely this isn't necessary." The king's head snapped toward his guard, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Are you questioning my orders?" "No, Your Majesty." Garrett's voice had gone very small. "I'll have the report ready." "Good." The king turned back to me, and his expression softened slightly, though tension still bracketed his mouth. "What's your name?" "Eleanor," I whispered. "Eleanor Ashford." "Eleanor." He said it carefully, as if committing it to memory. "You're coming with us." Panic spiked through me. "Your Majesty, I can't." That wasn't a request. But his tone was gentler now, almost kind. "You're clearly unwell, underfed, and it's going to rain again before dawn. I'm not leaving you here." He extended his hand toward me, and I stared at it like it might burn me. This made no sense. Kings didn't collect homeless servants from alleyways. They didn't care about false accusations or proper investigations. And they certainly didn't look at discarded maids with something that resembled regret in their eyes. But his hand remained steady, waiting, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Cold pinpricks against my skin that promised a miserable night ahead if I stayed. Slowly, hesitantly, I reached out and placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm, calloused, strong, and he pulled me to my feet with effortless ease. I swayed slightly, dizzy from standing too quickly, and his other hand came up to steady my elbow. "When did you last eat?" he asked quietly. "Yesterday, I think. The baker sometimes." I trailed off, embarrassed. His expression darkened, but not at me. At something else. Something internal. "Garrett, your cloak. Your Majesty. Give her your cloak. Now." Within moments, heavy wool settled around my shoulders, far too large but blessedly warm. The king guided me forward, his hand still supporting my elbow, as if he thought I might collapse. Perhaps I might. The world felt unstable, tilted wrong, reality refusing to align with what was happening. As we walked through the emptying market square, I caught sight of our reflection in a shop window, the powerful Alpha King in his dark formal clothes, surrounded by armed guards, and me, bedraggled, filthy, drowning in a borrowed cloak. We looked like a scene from a story, the kind where the beggar girl turns out to be a hidden princess. But I wasn't a princess. I was just Eleanor, who scrubbed floors and tried to be invisible, and failed even at that. "Your Majesty," I said softly as we walked, "why are you doing this?" He glanced down at me, and for just a moment, the hardness left his features entirely. "Because 3 weeks ago, I looked at you during the selection and saw something that made me pause. Something real, in a room full of performance, and then you vanished, and I was told you'd simply left service to care for a sick relative." My breath caught. "They told you I left? They lied." His voice went cold again, and I'm going to find out why. The rain began to fall in earnest, and the king quickened our pace toward the waiting carriages at the edge of the square. But before we reached them, he stopped and turned to face me fully, his dark eyes searching mine. "Eleanor," he said quietly, and there was something vulnerable in the way he spoke my name. "I need you to understand something. What happened to you? What was done to you? That was not justice, and I intend to make it right." I stared up at him, this powerful man who could crush me with a word, and saw something I never expected to see in an alpha's eyes, genuine remorse, as if my suffering somehow mattered to him, as if I somehow mattered. "Why?" I whispered. His hand came up, hovering near my face but not quite touching, and when he spoke, his voice was barely audible over the rain. "Because," he said slowly, "I think you might be the only honest person I've met in 10 years. The carriage ride back to the royal estate passed in a blur of rain-streaked windows and hushed conversations I wasn't meant to hear. I sat across from the king, wrapped in Garrett's cloak, acutely aware of the mud staining the velvet seats and the way the other guards kept glancing at me with barely concealed confusion. The Alpha King himself said nothing, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the window, jaw tight with an anger that seemed to radiate from him in waves. I wanted to ask what would happen to me, whether I'd be questioned, investigated, thrown back out once he realized I truly was nobody important. But the words stuck in my throat, and so I sat in silence, watching the city give way to manicured grounds and towering iron gates. The estate looked different at night, larger somehow, more imposing. Gas lamps lined the curved driveway, casting golden pools of light across perfectly trimmed hedges. I'd scrubbed these entrance steps 100 times, always in the early morning before the family woke. I'd never imagined arriving through the front doors as a guest, or whatever I was now. The carriage stopped, and Garrett opened the door, offering his hand to help me down. I took it carefully, my legs unsteady after 3 weeks of sleeping on stone. The king descended after me, immediately issuing orders to the guards who'd materialized from the shadows. "Wake the head steward, and find Lady Cordelia. I want them both in my study in 20 minutes. He turned to a younger guard with kind eyes. "Thomas, escort Miss Ashford to the East Wing guest quarters. Make sure she has everything she needs. Food, clean clothes, a bath. Post someone outside her door, but make it clear she's a guest, not a prisoner." "Your Majesty, the East Wing?" Thomas looked startled. "That's where—" "I know where it is." The king's tone brooked no argument. "Do as I say." Thomas nodded quickly and gestured for me to follow him. I hesitated, looking back at the king, wanting to thank him or explain or somehow make sense of what was happening. But he'd already turned away, striding toward the main entrance with the focused intensity of a man preparing for battle. The East Wing, I learned as Thomas led me through carpeted hallways, was reserved for visiting dignitaries and important guests. My room, calling it a room felt like an insult to the space, was larger than the entire apartment I'd shared with my mother before she died. A 4-poster bed dominated the center, piled high with pillows and quilts. Tall windows overlooked the gardens, currently dark but promising a beautiful view come morning. A writing desk sat in one corner, a cushioned reading chair in another, and through an adjoining door, I glimpsed a private bathroom with a porcelain tub. "I'll have food sent up," Thomas said gently, apparently taking pity on my stunned silence. "And I'll find some appropriate clothing. You're about the same size as the king's sister, I think. She won't mind lending a few things." The king had a sister. I'd never seen her, never even heard her mentioned during my time in service. But then, servants rarely learned family details unless they were directly relevant to our duties. "Thank you," I managed. "You're very kind." He smiled, transforming his serious face into something warmer. "The king was right to bring you here. Whatever happened to you, it wasn't fair." We all knew it wasn't fair. I stared at him. "You knew?" "We knew something was wrong." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "Lady Cordelia has always been difficult. But she's family, and her word carries weight. When you were dismissed, some of us questioned it, but..." He trailed off, shrugging helplessly. "We're just guards. Our opinions don't count for much." Before I could respond, he excused himself, leaving me alone in this impossible room. I stood frozen for a long moment, afraid to touch anything, to disturb the perfection. Then my reflection caught my eye in the tall mirror by the wardrobe, and I couldn't hold back a small, horrified laugh. I looked like a ghost, pale and gaunt, my blonde hair tangled and matted, my dress torn and filthy beyond repair. Dark circles shadowed my eyes, and there were bruises on my arms I didn't remember getting. 3 weeks on the streets had left their mark, more visible than I'd realized while living through it. A knock at the door made me jump. "Miss Ashford, I have your dinner." A maid entered, not one I recognized, which was a small mercy, carrying a tray laden with more food than I'd seen in weeks. Roasted chicken, fresh bread, cheese, fruit, and a pot of tea that smelled like heaven. She set it on the small table by the window, gave me a quick, curious glance, and left without comment. I approached the food cautiously, half convinced it might vanish if I reached for it. But it remained solid and real, and when I finally took a bite of bread, I had to close my eyes against the rush of sensation. Warm, fresh, real. I ate slowly, forcing myself not to rush despite my body's desperate hunger. Too much too fast would make me sick, and I couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now, when I still didn't understand what game was being played, or what role I was meant to fill in it. The king had looked at me during the selection and seen something. What? I'd been terrified that day, trying so hard to blend in with the other hopefuls, even though I knew I didn't belong among them. I'd worn my best dress, threadbare at the hems but clean, and kept my eyes downcast as instructed. When he'd passed by, I'd glanced up for just a heartbeat, some foolish instinct making me meet his gaze. He'd stopped. I remembered that now, the detail coming back sharp and clear. He'd stopped, and his eyes had widened slightly, and for 3 endless seconds, the entire hall had held its breath. Then Lady Cordelia had appeared at his elbow, whispering something urgent, and he'd moved on. The next day, the hairpin had appeared in my quarters. I finished eating and turned toward the bathroom, where steam was already rising from the filled tub. Thomas must have sent someone to prepare it while I ate. I undressed slowly, leaving my ruined dress in a heap on the floor, and sank into water so hot it nearly burned. But it was a good burn, a cleansing burn, washing away 3 weeks of grime and fear and hopelessness. I scrubbed until my skin turned pink, washed my hair 3 times until it finally felt clean, and only then did I allow myself to lean back and simply exist in the warmth and safety of this moment. Tomorrow, everything might fall apart again. The king might discover I truly was nobody, that whatever he thought he'd seen in me was just projection or imagination. Lady Cordelia might spin new lies, produce new evidence of my unworthiness. I might find myself back on the streets, this brief respite nothing more than a cruel tease. But tonight, I was clean and fed and warm, and that would have to be enough. I stayed in the bath until the water cooled, then wrapped myself in a towel soft enough to be sinful and padded back into the bedroom. Someone had been in while I bathed. The food tray was gone, replaced by a neat stack of clothing on the bed. A nightgown, a day dress in soft blue, undergarments, even slippers. I dressed in the nightgown and climbed into the enormous bed, sinking into a mattress that felt like sleeping on clouds. The sheets smelled of lavender and sunshine, and the pillows cradled my head with perfect softness. I should have fallen asleep immediately. My body was exhausted, wrung out from weeks of stress and poor rest. But my mind raced, replaying every moment of the evening. The king's expression when he'd recognized me. His anger at my dismissal, his insistence that he would make it right. Why did he care? That question circled endlessly, finding no purchase on any reasonable answer. Eventually, exhaustion won over confusion, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep, filled with fragmented dreams of cobblestones and lantern light, and dark eyes that saw too much. I woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the disorienting sensation of not knowing where I was. For a panicked moment, I thought I'd somehow broken into the estate, that I'd be discovered and punished. Then memory returned, the king, the carriage, this room, and I sat up slowly, half expecting it all to have been a fever dream. But no. The room remained solid around me, beautiful and impossible. And there, draped over the chair, were the borrowed clothes, proof that last night had actually happened. A soft knock preceded the same maid from yesterday evening. "Good morning, Miss Ashford. I'm Clara. I've been assigned to attend you during your stay." During your stay, not permanently. A temporary arrangement then, until whatever needed to be resolved was resolved. "The king requests your presence in his study at 10 o'clock, Clara continued, setting down a breakfast tray, more food, enough for 3 people. "That gives you about an hour to prepare. Would you like help dressing?" I nodded, suddenly nervous. The study, where decisions were made and judgments passed. Where my fate would be determined by a man I barely knew, who seemed to care about my well-being for reasons I couldn't fathom. Clara helped me into the blue dress, which fit remarkably well, and brushed out my hair until it fell in soft waves down my back. She offered cosmetics, but I declined. Whatever happened today, I wanted to face it as myself, not hidden behind powder and paint. At 5 minutes to 10, Thomas appeared to escort me. We walked through hallways I'd once cleaned, past portraits of stern-faced ancestors and elaborate tapestries depicting historical victories. Servants scurried about their morning tasks, and more than one stopped to stare as I passed. News traveled fast in a household like this. The king's study was on the 3rd floor, in a corner tower with windows on 2 sides. Thomas knocked, announced me, and then stepped back, leaving me to enter alone. The room was surprisingly intimate compared to the grand spaces I'd seen elsewhere, lined with bookshelves, dominated by a large desk covered in papers and maps, furnished with comfortable chairs arranged near a fireplace, and there, standing by the window with his back to me, was the Alpha King himself. He'd shed last night's formal clothes for something simpler, dark trousers, a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and when he turned to face me, I saw exhaustion carved into his features. "Eleanor," he said, and gestured to a chair. "Please sit." I obeyed, perching nervously on the edge of the seat. He moved to stand before me, then seemed to think better of it, and took the chair beside mine instead, eliminating the power dynamic of him standing while I sat. "I spent the night investigating your dismissal," he said without preamble. "The report I received was illuminating." My heart hammered. "Your Majesty, I swear I didn't—" "I know you didn't steal anything." His voice was firm, certain. "The hairpin that was found in your quarters? It belonged to Lady Cordelia. She reported it missing the morning after the selection, and it conveniently appeared in your room that same afternoon. The timing alone is damning, but there's more." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and the intensity of his focus made me feel pinned in place. 3 servants came forward overnight, once they knew I was asking questions, and admitted they'd seen Lady Cordelia entering your quarters while you were working elsewhere. They were too afraid to speak before, afraid of losing their positions if they accused a family member. But they're willing to testify now. Relief and vindication flooded through me in equal measure, so strong I felt dizzy. "Then, I'm cleared?" "You were never guilty." His jaw tightened. "You were framed, deliberately and maliciously, by someone who should have protected the people under her authority, not persecuted them. Why?" The question escaped before I could stop it. Why would she do that? The king was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching mine. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost reluctant. "Because during the selection, I stopped when I saw you. I never stop. In 10 years of these ceremonies, I've walked through thousands of candidates without pausing once. But you," he exhaled slowly. "You looked up at me, and for just a second, I forgot where I was. Forgot the performance, the expectations, all of it. I just saw you. Actually saw you." And Cordelia noticed. My breath caught. She was jealous. Not jealous, threatened. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Cordelia has been angling to consolidate power for years. She wants her daughter married to someone influential, wants to control who I choose as queen, wants to ensure her family line remains close to the throne. You, someone she viewed as insignificant, catching my genuine attention, that was dangerous to her plans. He turned back to me, and there was something raw in his expression. "So she destroyed you, accused you of theft, had you thrown out without investigation, ensured you'd have no recourse and no future. All because I looked at you for 3 seconds too long. The weight of it pressed down on me, that my entire life had been upended because of a glance, a moment, something I hadn't even controlled. What happens now? Now?" His voice hardened. "Now, Lady Cordelia faces consequences. She'll be stripped of her position, removed from the household, and her family will answer for conspiring to falsely accuse a servant. The law is clear on such matters, even when the perpetrator is nobility." "Your Majesty, she's your family. She's a criminal." The words came out sharp, final. "And I won't protect criminals, even if we share blood. The law must apply equally, or it means nothing." He crossed back to me, and slowly, carefully, he knelt so we were at eye level. The gesture shocked me. An alpha king, kneeling before a former maid, but he didn't seem to notice the impropriety. "Eleanor, I want you to understand something. What was done to you was my failure. I should have verified your departure personally. I should have questioned why you vanished. I should have protected you, and I didn't. That guilt belongs to me. You didn't know. I should have known." His hand moved as if to touch mine, then stopped, hovering in the space between us. "And I want to make amends, if you'll let me. Your position in the household will be restored, with a promotion and increased wages. You'll have a proper room in the staff quarters, or if you prefer, a small cottage on the grounds, and you'll have my personal guarantee that nothing like this will ever happen again." It was generous. More than generous. It was everything I should want, but something in his eyes, some unnamed hunger or loneliness, made me hesitate. "Why do I feel like there's more?" I asked softly. His lips curved in a humorless smile. "Because you see too clearly. That was what stopped me during the selection. You weren't performing. Everyone else was playing a role, trying to be what they thought I wanted. But you were just yourself, afraid and genuine and utterly real." He finally let his hand fall to his knee, breaking the almost touch. "I'm surrounded by people who want something from me. Power, status, proximity to the throne. But you looked at me like I was just a man, and that..." He shook his head. "I haven't felt seen like that in longer than I can remember." My heart ached for him. This powerful man who seemed desperately lonely, despite, or perhaps because of, his position. "I don't want to be another person using you." "I know." His voice was barely a whisper. "That's exactly why I can't stop thinking about you." The confession hung between us, heavy with implications neither of us seemed ready to address. Outside, a clock chimed the hour, breaking the spell. The king rose smoothly to his feet, his expression shifting back to something more controlled, more regal. "You don't have to decide anything today," he said. "Take time. Settle in. Recover from what you've been through. Your room in the East Wing is yours for as long as you need it. We can discuss the details of your return to service whenever you're ready." I stood as well, smoothing the borrowed dress with trembling hands. "Thank you, Your Majesty, for everything." "Sebastian," he said suddenly. "My name is Sebastian. And when we're alone, I'd prefer you use it." The intimacy of the request made my pulse quicken. "I'm not sure that would be appropriate, Your Majesty." "Probably not." His smile was slight but genuine. "But I'm asking anyway." Before I could respond, a sharp knock interrupted us. Thomas entered, looking apologetic. "Your Majesty, Lady Cordelia has arrived. She's quite agitated." Sebastian's expression went cold. "Good, show her in. And Eleanor?" He looked at me steadily. "I'd like you to stay, if you're willing." She should face what she's done. I wanted to refuse, to escape before the confrontation could begin. But I saw the question in his eyes, not a command, but a request for solidarity, and found myself nodding. I'll stay. The approval in his expression made something warm unfurl in my chest, and I realized with startling clarity that I would have faced 1,000 Lady Cordelias if it meant seeing him look at me like that. Like I mattered. Like I was worth protecting. The door opened wider, and Lady Cordelia swept in, her beautiful face twisted with indignation, and I steeled myself for the storm about to break. Lady Cordelia froze when she saw me standing beside the king's desk. For just a fraction of a second, genuine shock flickered across her perfectly composed features, before her expression hardened into aristocratic disdain. "Sebastian," she said, ignoring me entirely. "I was told this was urgent. I didn't realize you'd be entertaining guests." "Eleanor is not a guest," Sebastian replied coolly. "She's a member of this household who was wrongfully accused and dismissed." "I believe you know something about that." Cordelia's green eyes narrowed. "I know she was caught with stolen property. The evidence was clear. The evidence was fabricated." Sebastian moved to stand beside me, a subtle gesture of solidarity that didn't escape his cousin's notice. "I have testimony from 3 servants who saw you entering Eleanor's quarters on the day the hairpin appeared. The same hairpin you reported missing that morning. Those servants are lying." "All 3 of them? Independently?" His voice dropped to something dangerous. "They had no reason to lie and everything to lose by coming forward. Unlike you, who had every reason to remove someone you perceived as a threat." Cordelia's composure cracked slightly. "A threat? Her? She's nobody, Sebastian. A servant girl with no family, no connections, nothing. She's someone I noticed," he interrupted quietly, "during the selection, and that was enough to make you destroy her life." The silence that followed was suffocating. Cordelia's face had gone pale beneath her powder, her hands clenching in the folds of her expensive gown. When she spoke again, her voice shook with barely contained fury. "You stopped for 3 seconds. 3 seconds, Sebastian, and you want to upend everything over it?" "I did what was necessary to protect this family's interests. That girl had ideas above her station. She had no ideas at all," I said quietly, surprising myself. Both of them turned to look at me, and I forced myself to continue despite my racing heart. "I knew my place, Lady Cordelia. I never aspired to anything beyond my work. When the king looked at me during the selection, I was as surprised as anyone, but you decided that surprise was ambition, and you punished me for something I never sought." Cordelia's lip curled. "You expect me to believe you had no designs? That you weren't trying to catch his eye, to elevate yourself?" "I expect you to tell the truth," Sebastian cut in, his tone like ice. "But since that seems beyond you, let me be clear about what happens next. You are removed from your position as head of household, effective immediately. You will leave the estate by sunset today, and you will not return without my explicit permission. Your daughter's engagement to Lord Ashton is dissolved. I've already sent word, and if you ever attempt to contact Eleanor or interfere with her life again, the consequences will be far more severe." Cordelia's face flushed red. "You would exile your own family over a servant? The council will never support this." "The council answers to me." Sebastian's voice went dangerously soft. "And I answer to the law, which you violated. Be grateful I'm not pursuing formal charges. Framing someone for theft is a criminal offense, cousin or not." For a long moment, Cordelia stared at him, and I saw her mentally calculating, searching for some angle or leverage, finding none. Her gaze shifted to me, and the hatred in her eyes made my skin crawl. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "You may have his protection now, but it won't last. Men like him don't stay interested in girls like you. Eventually, you'll be discarded, and when that happens, you'll have nothing. No position, no reputation, nothing but the knowledge that you brought down a noble house for a few weeks of attention." The words hit harder than they should have, finding every insecurity I'd tried to bury. Because wasn't she right? What was I to Sebastian beyond a momentary fascination, a guilty conscience he wanted to soothe? "Out." Sebastian's single word cracked like a whip. "Now, Cordelia, before I change my mind about those formal charges." She left with her head high, but I could see the tremor in her hands as she swept past. The door closed behind her with a decisive click, and the tension in the room didn't dissipate so much as transform into something different, something weighted with unspoken things. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," Sebastian said quietly. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the room. "She wasn't entirely wrong, Eleanor." "No, let me finish." I turned to face him, needing him to understand. "I don't know what this is between us. I don't know if it's guilt or curiosity or just loneliness recognizing itself. But I can't be the reason you destroy family relationships or make enemies of the nobility. I'm not worth that." He crossed to me in 3 swift strides, and his hands came up to frame my face, gentle, despite the intensity burning in his dark eyes. "Don't tell me what you're worth. You survived 3 weeks on the streets because of a lie, and you came through it without losing your compassion or your honesty. You looked at me today during Cordelia's accusations, and you still tried to find reason in her actions, even after what she did to you. That strength, that goodness. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" His thumbs brushed my cheekbones, and I realized I was crying. Silent tears sliding down my face. "I'm scared," I whispered. "I'm scared this is temporary, that I'll lose everything again, that I'll start to hope and then I'll prove it's not temporary." He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching mine. "I'll prove you can hope, that you can trust this. Give me that chance, Eleanor, please." I wanted to. God, I wanted to so badly it physically hurt. But fear held me frozen, all the lessons learned from a lifetime of disappointment screaming warnings in my head. A knock at the door made us both step back quickly. Thomas entered, looking apologetic. "Your Majesty, the council has assembled for the morning session. They're waiting." Sebastian exhaled slowly, clearly frustrated by the interruption. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes." After Thomas left, Sebastian turned back to me. "I have to go, but this conversation isn't finished. Will you have dinner with me tonight, just the 2 of us? Somewhere private where we can actually talk." It was dangerous. Every instinct I had for self-preservation told me to decline, to keep distance between us, to protect myself from inevitable heartbreak. But I looked into his eyes and saw the same fear I felt, the fear of being alone, of being seen only for what you could provide rather than who you were. "Yes," I heard myself say. "I'll have dinner with you." The relief on his face was so profound, it made my chest ache. 7 o'clock. "I'll send someone to bring you to the private dining room." He hesitated, then added softly, "Thank you, Eleanor, for staying, for not running." After he left, I stood alone in his study for a long moment, trying to process everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, I'd been sleeping on cobblestones. Now I was standing in the Alpha King's private rooms, preparing for a dinner that felt suspiciously like a date, with a man who looked at me like I held answers to questions he'd stopped asking years ago. Clara appeared to escort me back to my room, and I spent the rest of the day in a strange state of suspension. I tried to read from the books I found on the shelf, but couldn't focus. I picked at the lunch that was brought, my stomach too knotted with nerves to eat properly. I stared out the window at the gardens below, watching servants go about their duties I'd performed just weeks ago. Around 4 o'clock, Clara returned with an armful of dresses. "The king asked that we find you something appropriate for dinner," she explained, laying them across the bed. "These belong to his sister, Princess Helena. She's currently traveling abroad, but I'm certain she wouldn't mind the loan." I examined the dresses carefully, all beautiful, all far finer than anything I'd ever worn. "Clara, can I ask you something?" "Of course, miss. What's he like?" "Really like, I mean. Not the public persona, but him." Clara's expression softened. "He's lonely, miss. Has been for as long as I've worked here. The late king, his father, was a hard man, demanded perfection, showed little affection. His Majesty learned early to keep his feelings locked away. When his sister left on her diplomatic tour last year, I think it got worse. She was the only person he seemed truly comfortable with. She smoothed one of the dresses absently. The selection ceremonies, the parade of candidates, I think he dreads them. All those women performing, competing, none of them caring about him as a person, just the crown he wears. And then you looked at him like he was human and..." She smiled gently. "Well, you saw how he responded." Her words settled something in me. A piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Sebastian wasn't looking for perfection or performance. He was looking for connection, for someone who saw past the titles and power to the man underneath. "Help me choose," I said quietly. "I want to look nice, but I don't want to seem like I'm trying too hard." Clara's smile widened, and together we selected a dress in deep emerald green, simple in design, but elegant in execution. She helped me bathe again, wash my hair, and then spent an hour creating soft curls that framed my face. A touch of color on my lips, a hint of powder to even my complexion, and when I finally looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I looked like someone who belonged in this world, someone worthy of dining with a king. At precisely 7 o'clock, Thomas arrived to escort me. We walked through the estate's corridors, but instead of heading to the formal dining hall, he led me to a smaller room in the residential wing. Warm light spilled from the doorway, and I could smell something delicious. Roasted meat and fresh bread and herbs I couldn't name. "He's waiting inside," Thomas said with an encouraging smile. "And miss, try to relax. He's just as nervous as you are." The idea of the Alpha King being nervous seemed absurd. But when I entered the room and saw Sebastian standing by the window, I realized Thomas was right. His posture was tense, his hands clasped behind his back in a way that suggested he was restraining himself from fidgeting. He turned when I entered, and the expression that crossed his face made my breath catch. Wonder, appreciation, something deeper that I didn't dare name. "Eleanor," he said softly, "you look beautiful." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "The dress is your sister's. Clara helped me. It's not the dress." He crossed to me slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might spook me. "Though green suits you, it's the way you're standing, the way you're looking at me, like you're not afraid anymore." "I'm terrified," I admitted. "But I'm here anyway." His smile was slight, but genuine. "That's called courage. Come, sit. I had the kitchen prepare something special." The table was set intimately, 2 place settings facing each other, candles providing soft light, a bouquet of fresh flowers at the center. It was romantic in a way that seemed carefully orchestrated, as if he'd planned every detail. He held my chair for me, a gesture that felt both courtly and genuine, then took his own seat. For a moment, we just looked at each other, and I saw my own uncertainty reflected in his eyes. "I don't know how to do this," he said suddenly. "Court someone, I mean. Not properly. Everything in my life has been arranged or formal or performative. This, sitting with someone I actually want to know, trying to make a real connection, I'm afraid I'll do it wrong." His honesty disarmed me completely. "I don't know how to do this either. No one's ever looked at me the way you do. Like I matter. You do matter." He reached across the table, palm up, an invitation. "More than you know." I placed my hand in his, feeling the warmth of his skin, the calluses that spoke of weapons training and hard work. His fingers closed around mine gently, and something in my chest loosened, a knot of fear beginning to unravel. "Tell me about yourself," he said quietly, "not the facts in your employment record. Real things. What you dream about, what makes you laugh, what you're afraid of." And so I did. Slowly at first, then with growing confidence, I told him about my mother who died when I was 16, about the books I'd loved to read as a child, about the gardens I'd tended at the estate, because growing things made me feel useful. I told him about the fear that had lived in my chest for 3 weeks and the strange relief I'd felt when he'd found me, as if some part of me had been waiting for rescue, even when I'd stopped believing it would come. He listened with complete attention, never interrupting, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of my hand. And when I finally ran out of words, he shared his own stories, about a childhood spent trying to please an impossible father, about the weight of expectations that had crushed any sense of his own desires, about watching candidates parade through selection ceremonies and feeling nothing but emptiness until you, he said softly. You looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I felt something real, something that wasn't duty or responsibility or the role I'm supposed to play, just connection. Dinner arrived in courses, each more delicious than the last, but I barely tasted any of it. All my attention was focused on Sebastian, on the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, on the vulnerability in his voice when he spoke about his loneliness, on the gentle strength of his hand holding mine. "Can I ask you something?" I said, during a lull in conversation. "During the selection, after you stopped, what did Cordelia say to you?" His expression darkened slightly. She said you were a servant who'd somehow infiltrated the ceremony, that you had no business being there. She suggested you might be trying to embarrass the crown, or that you'd lied to gain entry. It was enough to make me doubt what I'd felt, to convince myself I'd imagined the connection. And now? Now I know she was lying because she was threatened. And I know what I felt was real, because I feel it even stronger now. He stood, still holding my hand, and gently pulled me to my feet. Dance with me? There's no music. Then we'll make our own. He drew me close, one hand at my waist, the other still clasping mine, and we swayed gently in the candlelight. It was intimate and terrifying and perfect. I could feel the solid strength of him, smell cedar and something wild that was just him. And when I rested my head against his chest, I heard the steady thrum of his heartbeat. Eleanor, he murmured against my hair. I know this is fast. I know you have every reason to be cautious. But I need you to know, this isn't curiosity or guilt or some passing fascination. You matter to me. You've mattered since the moment I first saw you, and every moment since has only made it stronger. I pulled back enough to look up at him. What are you saying? His dark eyes searched mine, and I saw nervousness and hope, and something that looked like fear. I'm saying I want to court you properly. I want to know everything about you. I want to build something real with you if you'll let me. And I'm saying that when the next selection ceremony comes, if you're willing, I want to choose you. Not as my queen, he added quickly, seeing my panic. Not yet. Just as someone I'm courting, someone I'm building a future with. One step at a time, my mind reeled. The Alpha King wanted to court me, publicly, despite my background, despite the scandal it would cause, despite everything. The council will never accept it, I whispered. The council will learn to live with my choices. His hand came up to cup my face. I'm not my father. I won't let duty destroy the possibility of happiness. Not anymore. I should have said no. Should have protected us both from the inevitable fallout. But looking into his eyes, seeing the hope and fear and genuine affection there, I found myself nodding instead. One step at a time, I agreed softly. His smile transformed his entire face, making him look younger, lighter, free of the weight he usually carried. And when he leaned down slowly, giving me time to pull away, I rose on my toes to meet him instead. The kiss was gentle, questioning, filled with promise rather than demand. His lips were warm against mine, and when I sighed into it, his arm tightened around my waist, pulling me closer. It was my first kiss, and it felt like everything I'd read about in books. Sparks and warmth, and a sense of rightness that went bone deep. When we finally pulled apart, both breathing slightly harder, he rested his forehead against mine. Stay, he whispered. Not here. Not tonight. But stay at the estate, not as a servant, but as whatever you want to be. Give this a chance to grow. And surrounded by candlelight and the lingering taste of his kiss, with my heart fuller than it had been in years, I gave him the only answer I could. Yes. The next 3 weeks passed in a dream I kept expecting to wake from. Sebastian kept his word about courting me properly, slowly, carefully, with a patience that both frustrated and reassured me. We had breakfast together most mornings in the private dining room, talking about everything and nothing while the sun rose over the gardens. He showed me parts of the estate I'd never seen during my time as a servant. The library with its vaulted ceilings and endless shelves, the conservatory filled with exotic plants, the tower observatory where his sister used to study the stars. But he also continued his duties as king, disappearing for hours into council meetings and diplomatic sessions, leaving me to navigate my strange new existence in the spaces between servant and nobility. Clara remained my constant companion, helping me adjust to clothes that didn't have patches, food that appeared without me having to beg for it, and the curious stares of staff who couldn't quite figure out what I was doing in the East Wing. The gossip was inevitable. I heard whispers in hallways, felt eyes following me whenever I ventured into shared spaces. Some of the servants were happy for me, particularly Thomas, and a few others who'd witnessed my dismissal and felt the injustice of it, but others were suspicious, resentful, convinced I'd somehow manipulated the king for personal gain. I tried not to let it bother me, tried to focus on the tentative happiness growing between Sebastian and me, the way his face lit up when I entered a room, the gentle touches that were becoming more frequent. his hand at the small of my back. Fingers brushing mine as we walked, the soft kiss he pressed to my forehead before leaving for council meetings. But Cordelia's words haunted me. Men like him don't stay interested in girls like you. On the 18th day, Sebastian invited me to accompany him on a ride through the royal forests. I'd never been on a horse, something that seemed to delight him rather than embarrass me. "Then I'll teach you," he said, eyes warm with affection. "It's time you experienced the estate properly, not just from inside walls." The stables were impressive, rows of gleaming horses attended by grooms who clearly loved their work. Sebastian's mount was a massive black stallion that seemed to match his energy, powerful and barely restrained. For me, he selected a gentler mare named Daisy, with kind eyes and a patient temperament. "She was my sister's favorite," he explained, stroking the horse's neck. "Helena learned to ride on her. She'll take care of you." With Sebastian's patient instruction and strong hands helping me mount, I found myself seated on horseback for the first time in my life. The height was dizzying, but Sebastian stayed close, one hand on Daisy's bridle, walking us in slow circles until I relaxed into the rhythm. "There," he said softly. "You're a natural. Ready to try something faster?" We rode out together, Sebastian keeping his stallion to an easy pace beside me. The forest was beautiful in late autumn, trees blazing with color, the air crisp and sharp with the promise of winter. He showed me a stream where he'd played as a child, a clearing where his sister had set up elaborate tea parties for her dolls, a ridge overlooking the entire valley where you could see 3 villages and the river winding through them like silver ribbon. We stopped at the ridge to rest the horses, and Sebastian helped me dismount, his hands strong and sure on my waist. For a moment, he didn't let go, just stood there looking down at me with an expression I was learning to recognize. Hunger mixed with restraint, desire tempered by respect for the pace I needed. "What are you thinking?" I asked softly. "That I want to kiss you," he admitted. "That I've wanted to kiss you every moment since that first night, but I'm trying to be patient, to let this develop naturally. And if I don't want you to be patient," his eyes darkened. "Eleanor." I rose on my toes and kissed him, cutting off whatever careful, honorable thing he was about to say. He made a sound low in his throat, surprised, but then his arms came around me, pulling me flush against him as he deepened the kiss. This wasn't like the gentle exploration of our first kiss. This was heat and need and weeks of tension finally finding release. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his control visibly frayed, he pressed his forehead to mine and laughed shakily. "You're going to destroy me," he murmured. "Completely unravel every carefully maintained discipline I have." "Good," I said, surprising myself with my boldness. "You're too controlled, too careful. Sometimes it's okay to just feel." He pulled back to look at me properly, and something in his expression shifted, became more open, more vulnerable. "I'm falling in love with you. I need you to know that. This isn't a game or an experiment or guilt manifesting as affection. I'm falling in love with you, Eleanor Ashford. And it terrifies me." My heart stuttered. "Why does it terrify you?" "Because I've never felt this before. Because I don't know how to protect this, to keep it safe from all the forces that will try to destroy it. The council, the nobility, the expectations." He cupped my face in his hands. "I'm afraid I'll fail you, that I won't be strong enough to choose you over duty when the pressure comes." I covered his hands with mine. "Then we'll be strong enough together, one step at a time, remember?" His kiss this time was tender, reverent, filled with gratitude and something deeper. When we finally rode back to the estate, his hand found mine, our horses walking so close our legs brushed with every step. That evening, Sebastian summoned me to his study with unusual urgency. When I arrived, I found him pacing, tension radiating from every line of his body. Papers were scattered across his desk, and his hair stood in wild angles as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. "What's wrong?" I asked immediately. He turned to face me, and I saw frustration and anger warring in his expression. "The council met this afternoon. They've decided to hold another selection ceremony in 2 weeks." My stomach dropped. "Another one? But you just had one 3 months ago." "Exactly. They're pressuring me to choose a queen, claiming the kingdom needs stability and an heir. But the real reason..." His jaw tightened. "They've heard rumors about us, about me courting someone unsuitable. This is their attempt to force my hand, to parade acceptable candidates in front of me and pressure me into choosing one of them instead of you." The fear that had been lurking beneath my happiness surged forward. Maybe you should. What? He stared at me as if I'd suggested he abdicate. Choose someone suitable, someone the council approves of, someone who won't cause political upheaval. Eleanor, no. He crossed to me in 3 swift strides. I'm not giving you up to make the council comfortable. I told you I was falling in love with you, and I meant it. I'm not walking through another selection ceremony pretending to consider candidates when I've already found the person I want. But I can't participate in the selection, I said desperately. I have no family, no title, no standing. The requirements are arbitrary and outdated. He gripped my shoulders gently. But you're right that trying to include you in the official ceremony would cause problems we're not ready to handle. So I have a different plan. He led me to his desk, showing me one of the scattered papers, a formal document with elaborate seals. I'm going to walk through their ceremony, as required. I'll let them parade their candidates and make their speeches. And then, at the end, I'm going to announce publicly that I've already chosen to court someone, that my decision is made, and that the council's manipulations won't change it. My heart raced. Sebastian, that's political suicide. They'll rebel. Let them try. His voice was steel. I'm not my father, Eleanor. I won't sacrifice my happiness, our happiness, for their approval. Yes, there will be fallout. Yes, we'll face opposition, but I'll face it standing beside you, not alone. He took my hands in his. Unless you don't want this, unless the pressure is too much and you'd rather I choose someone else. No. The word burst out of me, fierce and certain. I don't want you to choose someone else. I took a shaky breath. I want to be brave enough to stand beside you, even when it's terrifying. His smile was radiant. Then we'll be terrified together. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation and barely contained chaos. Sebastian met with advisors, drafted statements, prepared for every possible council objection. I spent hours with Clara, learning proper etiquette and court protocols, not to change who I was, but to be prepared for the scrutiny that was coming. Thomas became an unexpected ally, teaching me about the noble families I'd soon face, their histories and allegiances and likely reactions. Lady Margrave will be your biggest opponent, he warned. She has 3 daughters of marrying age, and has been lobbying for one of them to be queen for years. She'll see you as a personal insult. The night before the selection ceremony, I couldn't sleep. I paced my room in the east wing, wearing a path in the expensive carpet, anxiety churning in my stomach. Around midnight, a soft knock made me jump. Sebastian stood in the doorway, still fully dressed, looking as sleepless as I felt. I saw your light still on, he said quietly. Couldn't sleep either. I'm scared, I admitted. Tomorrow, everything changes. Once you make that announcement, there's no taking it back. I don't want to take it back. He entered the room, closing the door behind him. Improper, scandalous, and exactly what I needed. Eleanor, look at me. I turned to face him, and he crossed to me, taking both my hands in his. Tomorrow is going to be difficult, he said steadily. People will say cruel things. They'll question your worth, my judgment, everything about us. But I need you to remember something. You survived being framed, dismissed, and living on the streets. You survived 3 weeks of hell that would have broken most people. Whatever tomorrow brings, you're strong enough to face it. What if I'm not? The question came out small, childish. Then I'll be strong enough for both of us. He pulled me into his arms, and I melted against him, drawing comfort from his solid warmth. We're in this together, remember? One step at a time. We stood like that for a long time, just holding each other, drawing strength from the connection between us. Eventually, he pulled back enough to look down at me, and I saw my own fear and determination reflected in his eyes. Stay with me tonight, I whispered. I don't mean, just stay. I don't want to be alone. Understanding and tenderness flooded his expression. Of course. We lay down on the bed together, fully clothed, his arms wrapped around me from behind. It was intimate but chaste, comforting rather than passionate. His breath was warm against my neck, his heartbeat steady against my back. And slowly, finally, I felt myself relax. Sebastian? I murmured, half asleep. Whatever happens tomorrow, thank you. For seeing me. For choosing me. His arms tightened around me. Thank you for being brave enough to let me. I drifted off to sleep, feeling safer than I had since my mother died, wrapped in the arms of a man who'd chosen me over duty, over approval, over everything his position demanded of him. The morning came too quickly. Sebastian left before dawn to avoid scandal, but not before pressing a soft kiss to my forehead and whispering, "I'll see you after the ceremony. Wait for me." Clara arrived early to help me prepare. She'd chosen a dress in deep blue, elegant but not ostentatious, appropriate for someone who wasn't technically attending the ceremony but would be witnessing its aftermath. She arranged my blonde hair in a simple style that emphasized my features rather than hiding them, and applied cosmetics with a light hand. "You look perfect," she said, stepping back to admire her work. "Worthy of a king." "I'm not worthy of anything," I said quietly. "I'm just me. And that's exactly why he loves you." She squeezed my hand. "Now come. Thomas is waiting to escort you to the observation room." The selection ceremony was held in the grand ballroom, but there was a small gallery above it, where guests could observe without participating. Thomas led me there, to a spot behind a decorative screen where I could see without being easily seen. The ballroom filled quickly, hundreds of young women in their finest dresses, accompanied by their families, all hoping to catch the Alpha King's eye. They were beautiful, all of them, polished and perfect, and exactly what a queen should look like. My stomach churned with inadequacy. Then Sebastian entered, and the room fell silent. He was magnificent in formal dress. Black coat with silver embroidery, his dark hair perfectly styled, every inch the powerful Alpha King, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful neutrality of his expression. He was preparing for battle. The ceremony began. Sebastian walked through the rows of candidates, pausing occasionally to exchange polite words, but never stopping the way he'd stopped for me. I watched noble families grow frustrated, watched young women's faces fall as he moved past without real interest. Lady Margrave was there, as Thomas had predicted, with her 3 daughters positioned prominently. When Sebastian barely glanced their way, I saw fury flash across her face. The walkthrough took nearly an hour. Then Sebastian returned to the dais, and the room held its collective breath, waiting for him to announce his choice. "Thank you all for attending," he said, his voice carrying easily through the vast space. "Your presence honors the crown and the kingdom. However, I must inform you that this selection will not result in a chosen queen." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Whispers erupted, quickly building to a roar of confusion and outrage. Sebastian raised his hand for silence, and the authority in the gesture quieted the room. "I have already chosen to court someone who saw me not as a king or a prize, but as a man. Someone whose honesty and courage and genuine heart have captured mine completely. I will not disrespect her or this process by pretending to consider other candidates when my choice has already been made." The whispers turned to shouts. Lady Margrave's voice rose above the others. "Who is this person? What family? What house?" Sebastian's eyes swept the room, and though he couldn't see me behind the screen, I felt the weight of his gaze as if he'd found me anyway. "Her name is Eleanor Ashford. She has no title, no powerful family, no political connections. She worked in this household as a maid until she was falsely accused and dismissed, an injustice I have since corrected. And despite everything she's endured, she remains kind and genuine and honest. Those are the qualities I value in a future queen." The uproar was deafening. Nobles shouted objections, candidates wept with disappointment, and through it all, Sebastian stood unmoved on the dais, his expression carved from stone. "The council will hear my formal declaration this afternoon," he continued, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Anyone who wishes to object may do so through proper channels. But my decision is final. This selection ceremony is concluded." He left the dais with swift, determined strides, guards moving to flank him as the crowd surged forward. I watched him disappear through a side entrance, then turned to Thomas, who was grinning widely. "Well," he said cheerfully, "that certainly made an impression. Come on, he'll want to see you." We navigated back through the estate to Sebastian's private study. He was there already, jacket discarded, standing by the window with his hands braced on the sill. When I entered, he turned sharply. "Eleanor." Relief flooded his features. He crossed to me in 2 strides and pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. "It's done. I've claimed you publicly. There's no going back now. The council will be furious," I said against his chest. Let them be furious. He pulled back to cut my face. I meant every word I said in there. You're who I choose, Eleanor. Today, tomorrow, always. Before I could respond, urgent knocking interrupted us. A guard entered, looking tense. Your Majesty, the council has convened an emergency session. They're demanding your immediate presence. Sebastian's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Tell them I'll be there in 10 minutes. After the guard left, he turned back to me. This is it. The real battle begins now, then go fight it, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. I'll be here when you're done. His kiss was fierce and quick, a promise and a claim all at once. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in his study to wait and wonder if our fragile happiness could survive the storm we'd just unleashed. The hours that followed were the longest of my life. I waited in Sebastian's study as afternoon stretched into evening, watching shadows lengthen across the floor, jumping at every sound in the hallway. Clara brought food I couldn't eat, and tea I couldn't taste. Her presence a comfort even as anxiety gnawed at me. The council meetings can go on for hours, she said gently, seeing my distress, especially when they're contentious. Try not to worry. But how could I not worry? Sebastian had just publicly declared his intention to court me, a nobody, a former servant, in defiance of centuries of tradition and the explicit wishes of his advisors. The political ramifications were staggering, and all because of me. When the door finally opened near 8 o'clock, I jumped to my feet. But it wasn't Sebastian. It was Thomas, his expression grim. The king asks that you join him in the council chamber, he said quietly. They want to meet you. My blood turned to ice. Meet me. Some of the council members are skeptical about His Majesty's judgment. They want to see for themselves who he's chosen. Thomas's expression softened. He would have refused, but he thinks having you face them now might actually help. Show them you're not what they're imagining. Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to hide, to run, but I thought of Sebastian standing alone in that council chamber, defending his choice to men who saw me as a threat to their careful political arrangements. If he could be brave for me, I could be brave for him. Take me to him. The council chamber was on the 3rd floor, a circular room with a domed ceiling and tall windows overlooking the grounds. A massive table dominated the center, surrounded by high-backed chairs occupied by stern-faced men and women in formal robes. And at the head of that table sat Sebastian, looking exhausted but unbroken. His eyes found mine the moment I entered, and something in his expression eased. He stood, a gesture that made several council members frown. Councilors, he said formally, may I present Eleanor Ashford. I approached the table on legs that trembled, forcing myself to walk with dignity despite my terror. Sebastian guided me to stand beside his chair, his hand warm and steadying on my lower back. An elderly woman with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes spoke first. Miss Ashford, I am Councillor Whitmore. Tell me, what qualifications do you possess that make you suitable to be courted by the Alpha King? The question was designed to humiliate me, and we both knew it. I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. None, Councillor. I have no title, no political connections, no training in diplomacy or governance. I worked as a housemaid until 3 weeks ago. I met her gaze steadily, but I'm honest. I see His Majesty as a man, not a crown, and I have no agenda beyond hoping to build something real with him. If those qualities have value to you, then perhaps I'm not entirely unsuitable. If they don't, then no amount of titles or connections would make me worthy in your eyes anyway. Silence fell across the chamber. Whitmore's expression remained unreadable, but I saw a flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, in her eyes. A heavy-set man in burgundy robes leaned forward. The king tells us you were falsely accused of theft. A convenient story, considering your sudden elevation. The evidence speaks for itself, Councillor Barrett, Sebastian interjected coldly. 3 servants testified to seeing Lady Cordelia plant the hairpin, or are you suggesting they committed perjury? I'm suggesting, Barrett said carefully, that this woman may have manipulated circumstances to gain your Majesty's sympathy. A calculated play for power. If I were calculating, I interrupted quietly, I would have stayed silent when falsely accused instead of defending myself and being thrown onto the streets. I would have found a wealthy patron during those 3 weeks, rather than sleeping in alleys. and I certainly wouldn't be standing here now, knowing that every word I say will be scrutinized and twisted. But His Majesty asked me to be here, and I came. That's not calculation. That's trust. The room fell silent again. Sebastian's hand moved from my back to clasp my hand openly, a gesture of solidarity that wasn't lost on anyone present. A younger counselor with kind eyes spoke up. "Miss Ashford, what do you know of the responsibilities that come with being queen?" "Very little, sir," I admitted. "But I'm willing to learn. I've spent my life working hard at whatever task was set before me. If His Majesty believes I can grow into this role, then I'll dedicate myself to proving him right." "And if the pressure becomes too much?" Whitmore asked. "If the scrutiny and expectations crush you? What then?" I thought of the cobblestones under my back, the hunger gnawing at my stomach, the terror of not knowing where my next meal would come from. I thought of the shame of being cast out, the loneliness of having nowhere to go, the strength it had taken to survive when everything had been stripped away. "Counselor Whitmore," I said steadily, "I've already survived being crushed. What you're describing, scrutiny, pressure, high expectations, those are challenges I can face with support and dignity. They're nothing compared to being truly broken. And I refuse to be broken again." Something shifted in the room. Not acceptance, exactly, but a grudging recognition that I wasn't the weak, manipulative creature they'd expected. Whitmore exchanged glances with several other counselors, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, she turned back to Sebastian. "Your Majesty, the Council cannot support this match officially. The precedent it sets, the political complications, I'm not asking for your support," Sebastian said quietly. "I'm informing you of my decision. Eleanor and I will court publicly. If that courtship leads to marriage, she will be your queen, whether you like it or not. Your options are to accept this gracefully, or to fight me every step of the way. But I assure you, I will win any such fight." "You're willing to fracture your own council over a woman you've known for less than a month?" Barrett demanded. "I'm willing to fracture my council over a principle," Sebastian corrected. "The principle that genuine connection matters more than political convenience. That honesty and courage have value beyond bloodlines and titles. And yes, that love, real love, not arranged marriages for political gain, should be possible even for a king." He stood, pulling me gently to stand beside him. "This meeting is concluded. You have my decision. How you respond to it is up to you, but Eleanor Ashford will be treated with respect in this household and beyond. Or you'll answer to me personally. Are we clear?" The silence was heavy with resentment and shock, but one by one, the counselors nodded their reluctant agreement. Whitmore was the last, her sharp eyes studying us both before she finally inclined her head. "Crystal clear, Your Majesty." Sebastian guided me from the chamber, his hand steady at my back. We walked in silence through the corridors until we reached his private rooms. Not the study, but his actual quarters, a space I'd never entered before. He closed the door behind us and immediately pulled me into his arms, burying his face in my hair. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I'm sorry I had to put you through that. I know it was terrifying." "You were terrifying," I said against his chest, "in the best possible way. The way you stood up to them, the way you stood up to them," he corrected, pulling back to look at me. "Eleanor, you were magnificent. You didn't back down, didn't apologize for who you are. You faced them with more courage than most trained diplomats could manage." I was shaking the entire time. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. He cupped my face in his hands. "You were brave and honest, and everything I knew you would be." And if Whitmore didn't admit it out loud, I saw the respect in her eyes. "You won them over, at least partially. They still don't want me here." "No," he agreed. "But they're starting to understand why I do." He kissed me then, slow and deep, pouring weeks of restrained passion into it. I melted against him, hands fisting in his shirt, returning the kiss with equal fervor. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes were dark with want. "Stay with me tonight," he whispered. "Really stay. I want to fall asleep beside you and wake up with you in my arms. I want..." He stopped, struggling for words. "I want you, Eleanor, all of you. But only if you want this too." My heart raced. But it wasn't fear making it pound. It was anticipation, desire, the absolute certainty that this was right. "I want this. I want you." What followed was tender and passionate, and occasionally awkward in the way of first times, but perfect in its honesty. Sebastian was patient and careful, ensuring my comfort, making me feel cherished rather than used. And when we finally lay tangled together in his bed, skin against skin, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my shoulder, I felt more at home than I ever had in any place I'd lived. "I love you," he murmured into the darkness. "I know it's fast. I know it's complicated, but I love you, Eleanor, completely." "I love you too," I whispered back, the words feeling both terrifying and inevitable. "Even though you're going to make my life infinitely more complicated." His laugh rumbled through his chest. "Fair point. But I promise to make it worthwhile." The next 6 months were a whirlwind of change and challenge. True to his word, Sebastian courted me publicly, taking me to state dinners, introducing me at court functions, walking with me through the city so people could see us together. The reactions were mixed. Some were genuinely happy for their king, charmed by the romance of it. Others were openly hostile, seeing me as an upstart who'd manipulated her way into power. Lady Margrave became my most vocal opponent, spreading rumors about my character and my supposed schemes. But Sebastian shut down each attack swiftly and decisively, making it clear that insulting me was insulting him. Slowly, grudgingly, even the most resistant nobles began to accept my presence. Whitmore proved surprisingly helpful, tutoring me privately in court protocols and political strategy. "If you're going to be queen," she said tartly during one lesson, "you might as well be a competent one." The common people took to me more quickly. Stories spread about my dismissal and survival, my rise from the streets to the king's side. I became a symbol of hope for those who felt invisible, proof that birth didn't determine worth, that even the powerless could find their place. I threw myself into learning everything I could. History, diplomacy, the complex web of alliances that govern the kingdom. I visited villages with Sebastian, listened to citizens' concerns, and worked with Whitmore to develop programs to help the homeless and impoverished. If I was going to be queen, I wanted to be worthy of it. Sebastian and I grew closer with each passing day. He taught me to ride properly, to dance, to navigate court politics without losing myself. I taught him to laugh more freely, to see beauty in simple things, to trust that love didn't have to be strategic or measured. 8 months after that night in the alley, Sebastian proposed. Not during a grand ceremony or public event, but in the estate gardens at dawn, just the two of us among the roses his sister had planted years before. "I don't have a ring yet," he said, kneeling before me. "I wanted to choose it with you, something that reflects who you are, rather than what you're supposed to be. But I can't wait any longer to ask. Eleanor Ashford, will you marry me? Will you be my queen, my partner, my equal in all things?" "Yes," I said through tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The wedding took place 3 months later. A grand affair that somehow managed to feel intimate despite the hundreds of guests. I wore a gown that Clara and I had designed together, elegant but not ostentatious, with subtle embroidery that told the story of our journey. Sebastian looked at me like I was the only person in the world, and when we spoke our vows, I felt the truth of them settle into my bones. I was no longer Eleanor the maid, Eleanor the homeless girl, Eleanor the outcast. I was Eleanor Ashford, queen, partner to a king who'd chosen love over duty, courage over convenience. The council stood when we were presented as husband and wife, even Whitmore managing something that might have been a smile. The common people cheered in the streets, celebrating a story that had captured their imaginations. The beggar who became queen, the king who'd chosen his heart. Years later, standing on the balcony overlooking those same streets with Sebastian's arm around my waist, and our first child sleeping peacefully in the nursery, I thought about that night in the alley. About the girl I'd been, hopeless and invisible, certain her story was over. She could never have imagined this. The happiness, the belonging, the sense of purpose that came from serving a kingdom that had once cast her aside. She could never have imagined a man who saw past her circumstances to the person beneath, who'd fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself. "What are you thinking?" Sebastian asked softly, pressing a kiss to my temple. "That I'm grateful," I said simply. "For the night you found me, for everything that came after. I'm grateful you let me find you." He turned me to face him, his dark eyes warm with love and contentment. "That you were brave enough to take a chance on a lonely king who didn't know what he was missing until he saw you." I rose on my toes to kiss him. This man who'd changed my life, who'd seen worth in me when I couldn't see it in myself. The city sparkled below us, our kingdom stretching to the horizon, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. The girl sleeping on cobblestones had been waiting for rescue, but she'd found something better. She'd found herself, her strength, and a partner who helped her become the person she was always meant to be, and that, I thought, as Sebastian held me close, was the truest kind of happily ever